Hello everybody, this is Dr. Kevin Connors. I want to do a short video on why we would recommend Cyrex testing. There's other laboratories, I'm not just stuck on Cyrex labs, but there's other laboratories that will do antibody testing as well. Cyrex does it well. In my book, I think they do it the best. That's why we use them when we test for antibodies. So a little explanation of what we're testing for. So an antigen is something that the immune system is trying to kill. So back up a little bit. You have two different ways that you get rid of things in your body that aren't supposed to be there. You have your immune system and you have your detoxification pathways. Now typically pesticides and chemicals and heavy metals and such are supposed to be gotten rid of through your detoxification pathways. But in the case of you being overwhelmed by a toxin, you are exposed to a lot of pesticides or something like that, then you can end up having an immune reaction against it. And when you have an immune reaction against it, you can create antibodies. So an antibody is a protein that is produced by the immune system in response to the presence of an antigen. That's the definition of an antibody. But an antigen is anything that's in the body that's not supposed to be there. Now I said pesticides and chemicals and things are supposed to go through your detox pathways, but we're exposed to so many of those things, it's not uncommon that we can create antibodies against them because they're prolonged in the body, in the bloodstream, in the tissues, that because our detox pathways are overwhelmed. Good thing to do is to read my 7 Phases of Detox book here. Your immune system is supposed to make antibodies against viruses and bacteria and pathogens that are killable, because that's what your immune system does. Your detoxification pathway gets rid of chemicals and non-living things. Your immune system gets rid of living things, bacteria, viruses, pathogens, microbes that are trying to reproduce in your body, make it a home, and use you as a host. That's what your immune system is supposed to do. And your immune system will create antibodies to do that. So that's what we're looking for. Is your immune system inadvertently creating antibodies against things that it shouldn't create antibodies against? And then worst case scenario, are you creating antibodies against your own cells, against your own tissues, against your own organs? That is what's called an autoimmune disease. If you're making antibodies against your thyroid, that's measurable. We can measure TPO antibodies, and you have excess antibodies against your thyroid, you have Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, depending on what state you're in. So that's what we're looking for when we're looking at antibodies. So briefly, when chemicals come into your body, they go into your cells, and your immune system will fire a reaction against it. Typically, you'll have what's called a Th1 response first, and then it can't kill it because it's not killable. And then you have a Th2 response. If your detoxification pathways can't get rid of it, then you have the B cell response, and you start to make antibodies against this thing. That's what we're talking about with your immune system. That's a normal response of your immune system in the presence of an antigen that is a living organism. You have a Th1 response in order to kill this pathogen, and it's not able to kill the pathogen, and a period of time goes by, and now you have a Th2 response to create antibodies so it can tag the pathogen. That's what an antibody does. It tags the pathogen so that now when you have a Th1 response, your T cells and your macrophages and your natural killer cells are able to find it easier and kill it. That's the whole purpose of antibodies. But if you're making antibodies against your self-tissue, you're destroying self-tissue. If you're making antibodies against mercury or lead or a pesticide, your immune system will fire to kill it. Well, those things aren't killable. They're not living organisms. So you just create this inflammatory response and an upgrade of inflammation in your body. That's one major reason why people have chronic inflammation. That chronic inflammation is because they have antibodies to things that aren't killable, like foods or chemicals. So every time their immune system fires, you're going to try to kill that which you have antibodies for, and if it's not killable, you just have this ramped up inflammation. So it's a good idea to try to test for those. Here's a picture of making antibodies against a virus. This is actually, I think, a picture of the coronavirus or something like that somebody drew up. But you make antibodies against it so it tags the virus or the bacteria so that now it's more recognizable by the killer cells, the macrophages. So you want antibodies against bacteria and viruses. That's really the definition of a healthy immune response. Oh, I have a really healthy immune system. What does that mean? Well, it really means I have a lot of antibodies against a whole bunch of different pathogens. So next time somebody says, do you have a healthy immune response? Say, yes, I have a lot of antibodies against a whole bunch of pathogens. But we don't want to have a lot of antibodies against non-living things. And we certainly don't want to have antibodies against our own tissues. So that's what we want to measure. We want to measure, do I have antibodies against non-living things or my own tissues? That's what an antibody test is. Cyrex does that well, and they have a lot of tests. That's really all they do is measure antibodies. That's what that lab does. They have a lot of different tests that they call arrays. So here's a couple of them. The one on the left here is their food sensitivity test. It measures, it's called Array 10. It measures a lot of different things. So 300 different things, cooked and raw foods and vegetables that you might not even feel like you have a tummy ache with when you eat, but you have antibodies against them circulated in your bloodstream because it is a blood test, that every time you do eat them, you fire a reaction, you cause more inflammation and more, just this whole negative cycle of inflammation takes place, and it can cause pain, it can cause problems all over your body. Array 11 is the chemical autoimmune reaction screen. So it's measuring aflatoxins, different types of molds, and what is produced by molds and what is produced by bacteria, formaldehyde, a whole bunch of different chemicals that we're exposed to in our environment that we really shouldn't be exposed to, or we should be excreting. But because we're exposed to so many different chemicals, our immune system or our detoxification pathways get overwhelmed, and these chemicals linger in our body. Our immune system tries to kill them, and of course they can't because they're not living things. And then our B cell or our Th2 system fires, and we end up creating antibodies against things we never should have created antibodies against. And this causes a lot of problems in health-wise. There's a joint autoimmune reaction screen. It's testing for arthritic peptides and collagen complex, and there's a neurological autoimmune reactive screen. This is a very serious one because if you have antibodies to your cerebellar cells, that is a major problem. So we see that a lot with chronic Lyme patients that have a lot of brain fog and can't think straight, and they have pain in all sorts of different areas. Well, you could have damaged microglial cells, and you really should watch the video in this module on microglial priming and neurological inflammation, because that goes into detail of damaged microglial cells or primed microglial cells. That's a brain cell that is responsible for the immune reaction in the brain. But once you have antibodies to the brain, to brain different tissue, then it's even more serious. So this is a major issue, why people have cognitive problems, why people have just all sorts of you have antibodies to certain parts of your brain. It can cause pain anywhere. It can cause sensitivity issues. It can cause the weirdest array of symptoms. And then there's the pathogen-associated immune reactivity screen for all sorts of different pathogens. So you have excess amounts of these things, it can be a major issue. And then array 5 is the multiple autoimmune reactivity screen. Now these are all blood tests, so you'll have to get a kit and you'll have to find a place where you can get a draw. So getting this drawn and sent into Cyrex, once you get the data back, it's very easy to read. You don't need me or a doctor to really go over the test with you, but what you need is, what am I going to do about it now? And we'll have videos about that in this module as well. What do I do when I have antibodies to different things? Well, it's really easy to understand. What do I do if I have antibodies to food? Well, I just have to stay off of those, but we'll have videos about that as well, because I have different recommendations for that. Remember, why do we test for antigens? Because of my cardinal rule. When you fire an immune response, for whatever reason, I take a whole bunch of immune stimulants, I'm going to fire an immune response. I have a cold, I'm going to fire an immune response. I'm exposed to strep, I could fire an immune response. When you do that, your immune system will attack and kill many times that which you have antibodies against first. Of course, it won't kill if you have antibodies against a chemical, but if you have antibodies against self-tissue, aka an autoimmune disease, and you are taking a whole bunch of immune stimulants, you are going to be killing that tissue. That's why if you have an autoimmune disease, you have no business taking immune stimulants on a regular basis. You just don't. So even if you have, like, I have Hashimoto's, but I feel like I'm coming down with something and I'm getting sick, well, you could take immune stimulants to help your body kill that virus or bacteria that you're being exposed to. You feel like you're coming down with something, but you better not be taking it on a regular basis. Taking immune stimulants on a regular basis will fire an immune response, and if you have antibodies against self-tissue, you are going to be killing yourself. So I hit this over and over again in a bunch of the videos when we talk about autoimmune Lyme. I just can't say it enough. So that's why we look for antibodies. That's why you want to look for antibodies and test for antibodies, so you know what you're dealing with, so you know how to move forward. That's always a good thing to do. We'll have more videos on this, so keep looking back at this site and this module, because we'll be continuing to add more stuff. Thanks so much. I'll be praying for you. Bye-bye.